Welcome to our panel on working with the cannabis industry. We have, to my left here is Tara Carver, and she's been involved in Humboldt County cannabis for over a decade. And she's currently the Executive Director of the Humboldt County Growers Alliance and sits on the Board of Directors for the California Growers Association and co-chairs their policy committee. Tara genuinely believes cannabis farms in Northern California have the opportunity to become worldwide leaders in sustainable agriculture. Next is John Ford, and John Ford is our Director of Planning and Building for Humboldt County, and he came on in October of 2016. So prior to moving to Humboldt, he served the County of Monterey for 8 years in various capacities, including leading current planning, advanced planning, and special projects. He also served as the planner and manager for the City of Roseville and as a land use technician for the City of Thousand Oaks. And then we have Scott Davies. Scott Davies has lived in Humboldt County and worked in the cannabis industry for 30 years. His decades of experience inform the infrastructure and methodologies employed at this farm, Winterbourne Farms in Honeydew, California. He is engaged in all levels of the industry's transformation and is motivated by the opportunity to improve both cultivation and products customers and patients consume through the regulatory framework that are taking shape at both the county and state levels. So welcome and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you CSAC for being here. Welcome to Humboldt County. On behalf of the cannabis industry, we are super grateful to have you. Thank you for everybody who went on the tour yesterday. All 3 stops came back to me and sent frantic text messages. How was it? Was it okay? So they just wanted to say thank you as well. My name is Tara Carver. I'm the Executive Director of the Humboldt County Growers Alliance. And as Ryan said, I sit on the Board of Directors for the California Growers Association, as well as our policy co-chair. My involvement in the cannabis industry in Humboldt County started about 15 years ago. I started trimming, processing, as some people call it, and worked my way up to becoming a farmer. Most of my farming career was actually in Rex's district, where Scott has his farm. When the state started moving towards a regulatory framework, Humboldt County obviously started going fast and furious, and we had a couple false starts in the past, and that is when I got involved in the advocacy, representing local farmers and talking about the issues and navigating the fun of the last 3 years. I participated as a stakeholder in developing our local land use ordinance, and from that effort, I was tapped on the shoulder in 2016 to work at a local consulting firm. I am not a consultant. I acted as a liaison between the firm and the farmer and had the really unique opportunity to visit over 100 different farms who were considering engaging in this process at that time. I left that position about 6 months ago to launch the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, and we are a strategic partner with the California Growers Association. We're very young. We're grassroots and bootstrapping it. And our mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance Humboldt County's world-renowned cannabis industry. When I started thinking about this panel and what I was going to say, I realized that my perspective is going to come off as very Humboldt-centric. I come from the industry, and I come from a county with 40-plus good and bad years of cannabis experience. And so looking out across the room, you know, some of you, especially the last panelists with all of the 4 counties represented in the North Coast, that we have a lot of experience with this industry. And then I'm looking at some counties that are just starting to dip their toe in. And so I just want to be really respectful of where we all are and where we're all going. And that every county is its really own special butterfly with its own set of special social, economic, and environmental situations. And so the advice I'm going to give, again, comes from a very Humboldt-centric perspective. When discussing working with the industry, or from my view, working with local government, because I pivot from one to the other on a daily basis, the only advice I can offer is how much collaboration is needed on this issue and how finding stakeholders and people who are willing to really drill down on the issues is of the utmost importance. I can honestly say wholeheartedly that Humboldt County's local government has put their best foot forward on this issue. from our sheriff to our ag commissioner to our new planning director, our supervisors, the industry, really respects everyone who has worked hard to get where we are. And it hasn't come without blood, sweat, and tears, for sure. But we've done a good job by working together, I think, at this point. As far as working with a pre-existing industry, I think it's really important to always consider that we, as industry, come from a place where we didn't have the opportunity to work with you. And now that we do, we don't necessarily have the skill sets to work with you. So it's really important to recognize that the more communication, the better. Director Ford has been incredible, especially the last few months, and I thank you so much for sending out press releases explaining, important deadlines or debunking myths or, setting the line and really communicating with the industry, because we've only been able to work amongst ourselves for safety issues. And so so there's a lot of false starts and rumors out there, I guess I should say. And it's really important to uphold communication between local government and industry, and don't be afraid to send out a press release explaining something for the third time. We need to hear it, and we appreciate it. I think that recognizing that the current cannabis industry does not have political boundaries is also really important. We can have a liberal vegan permaculture specialist have a farm right next to a hardline red meat eating conservative capitalist. And they actually are doing the same thing in the regulatory framework, but they come from different viewpoints. And this industry hasn't really fallen on a political spectrum so far. And so always understanding that, I think, is of definite importance. And then something to throw around, and I just want to kind of plant this seed, is that California has a multi-billion-dollar industry that is currently built on small businesses and small farms. What other industry has that? I really don't know. This has not been consolidated. It's definitely, there's moves to consolidate this industry, but right now as it stands, it's fairly small business and small farm minded. So just consider that when you're talking about your policies and how you move forward. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to touch on off the bat. So I'm going to turn it over to the Director Ford.
Thank you, Tara. So many years ago, as a student at Humboldt State, sitting in a remote sensing classroom, listening to the professor instruct a bunch of eager students that they could go out and ground truth remote sensing images in the field as long as they stayed within the boundaries that we had permission to be in, that we couldn't go outside of gates, that we couldn't go behind locked gates, that we couldn't go to places we didn't have permission to be, because there may be people there who are defending those anomalies with automatic weapons, and as students, we weren't to go and engage in that. That was really my first introduction into the cultural divide that existed between the cannabis industry and government and maybe what we could call the rest of the community. At that time, I had no foresight, understanding that one day I would be in the middle of a discussion that is one of the most important land use discussions of our time, which is the permitting of cannabis. Nor did I have a sense that that community that existed outside of government, in being invited to come into government, come into the culture, would create what I will call a culture clash. It may be a battle, it may be a war, but it is definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration. So when the state legalized medical marijuana, as we've already said, Humboldt County quickly passed an ordinance. One of the things for background that, in terms of the things I'm going to say that needs to be understood, is that we were litigated, we were sued, and we entered into a settlement agreement. That settlement agreement created two things. One, it created a deadline that all applications had to be submitted by December 31st, 2016. Thank you. And it also said that we could not modify the ordinance until an EIR was prepared, addressing everything about the cannabis ordinance. The primary intention of that ordinance was to allow existing cultivators who had not been previously part of a legal process, been part of an underground industry, to become legal and to also relocate existing cultivators who are in locations that are doing environmental damage to relocate into areas that were more suitable. And from an environmental impact standpoint, that has been successful, but as Supervisor Pinnell pointed out, sometimes there's unintended consequences with doing that. So when I accepted the position of director in 2016, I knew there would be a heavy volume of cannabis permits. The thing I didn't understand or anticipate was the cultural clash that would come along with it. So the cultural clash includes an understanding of the background of those folks who were cultivating 40 years ago or more, and their children and their grandchildren, who had operated really outside of the governmental process and who had come to distrust government. I hope that's not too strong of a statement. I would also say that there are folks who have moved into Humboldt County in particular more recently, have seen cannabis cultivation as easy money, and they're part of what can be described as the green rush. But then there's also government. And there's the government who has an established vocabulary. We have an established process, an established way of doing things. As those of you who are on staff understand that we're called upon to at least be neutral, but probably in interrogating applications to be a little bit adversarial. Well, for an industry that is already government averse, that comes across entirely the wrong way. So one of the things that happens is it creates the framework for huge miscommunication because we speak different languages, we use different vocabulary. And I'll just use one, for instance, what's a deadline? So for most of us, a deadline means something that we know that, I don't wait till 8:01 to get to work at 8. I come to work well before that, so I'm on time. Well, we received 2,337 incomplete applications in response to this deadline that was imposed by the litigation. 1,500 of those were submitted the last 2 weeks of December. 400 of those were submitted on the last day, December 30th. So, a deadline is wait till the very last minute and then do everything you need to do. The other part of that is that in order to accept these applications, we accepted 2,337 incomplete applications. So we had this huge volume, we had these huge filing cabinets, we had to buy new filing cabinets to support all the incomplete applications that are now sitting in a filing cabinet. And then fast forward into February, March, April, we had about 100 applications that were complete. So it's becoming very clear that something's wrong, and communication was necessary. But what was the problem? Is it that people had submitted applications just to avoid law enforcement? Or was there something else going on? So we started sending out messages, as Tara mentioned, and one of the first messages was that we're experiencing a lot of people who are starting without permits. We're going to hold you accountable for that. And oh, by the way, you need to get your applications complete because our ordinance requires that applications that are left incomplete for 6 months will be deemed withdrawn. And so that was interpreted horribly wrong. It was met with shock and panic on the part of the cultivation community. They thought we were trying to pull the rug out from under them. About that time, it was becoming clear to the cannabis industry that the process was not working with only 100 applications being complete. The community needed to be reassured, and so we sent out a letter stating that all applications that were received by June 30th, 2017, that's tomorrow, would be processed to action by June 1st, 2018, in time for state licensing. Now, this was interpreted in two ways. One is a deadline, and that had people panicking because now they thought they only had until June 30th to submit their applications. But one of the things that it did is at the end of the workday yesterday, we now have 550 applications that are complete. So we've taken in 400 applications in the last 3 weeks in terms of being complete. One of the other things that happened is that letter that I sent out saying that you had 180 days to get your application complete, and if you don't, your application is going to be deemed withdrawn. Well, the first batch of those letters, we sent out 154 of those letters. Of those, 144 are now complete. So part of it is learning how to message and to work with an industry that really does speak a different language. These aren't the folks that are usually involved in our development applications, that are represented by folks in our development community. They are folks who are out there who are, most of them are really good farmers. We have 1,576 applications that are from existing growers. So in terms of what the ordinance is trying to do, in terms of getting people to come out and become legal, that part's working. So I think one of the things I'd like to do just in saying in terms of closing is what we're experiencing is unprecedented. The numbers I just threw out at you are numbers to you. I hope the staff has some recognition that to get 400 applications in 3 weeks is mind-boggling. To get 1,500 applications in over the counter is mind-boggling. To have 2,300 applications in is undoable. So one of the things that's become clear to me is that the only way that I can function is in partnership with the community. Because it's the community who then begins to inform me about what the needs of the community are, what needs to be said, how it needs to be said. It can be a little nerve-wracking to hear that letter you just sent out caused complete panic. But frankly, the panic is good because it's got people's attention and they're actively engaged in getting their applications complete. And so that's what we're seeing. And on the other hand, the other thing that I've experienced too is that I've had people come to me and say, you really panicked a lot of people. And one of the people that I've heard, I didn't tell her I was going to say this, but we talked to Tara. And she explained to us what you're trying to achieve. And we're good with that. And so by having these relationships that are growing and building within the community, it may seem like an unholy alliance to some. But for an industry that is moving forward into uncharted, unprecedented territory, it's absolutely necessary.
Thank everybody for making the trip up to Humboldt County. It's great to see this much of a turnout, and we're in the midst of a historic moment for California, and just the fact that we're here in the Ingomar Club having a discussion about cannabis seems
with samples,
clear, with samples, clear evidence of how far we've come in how short a time, really. As the crucible of the cannabis industry in California and really the country, it is right that Humboldt County has taken the lead in building a regulatory framework for the cultivation industry. This really was made possible, as has been mentioned, by our supervisors, county planning staff, ag commissioner, and we owe them all a great debt of gratitude for that. As a cultivator, I've been involved in the industry here for 30 years. The single most rewarding aspect of this process has been the ability to forge and foster relationships with county staff, law enforcement, and people across the industry. That is really represents a sea change, as we've been historically walled off from each other by the lack of any sort of regulatory framework. So that's been enormously rewarding. And I would say it's the only way that Humboldt County has been able to get as far as we have, and it's the only way that any of the rest of the counties in California have a chance to do the same, is by drawing all these stakeholders together. There are very steep challenges for cultivators who elect to bring their operations, our businesses, into compliance. But I would like to really focus on some of the positive benefits to the cultivation industry that the building of a regulatory framework holds for us. And certainly at the top of that list for me is the removal of the sort of constant threat of prosecution. I mean, it's not only an enormous burden to bear, but it's a very toxic environment in which to conduct business. And it leads to, as Hezekiah Allen has said, people electing to grow in places that are good places to hide, but not good places to grow. And by bringing forth a regulatory framework, we're able to start addressing some of those issues. And it also prevents the kind of investments that any business would undertake to increase efficiencies, make the workplace safer. All of these kind of investments, whether they're in sort of high-tech modern greenhouses, processing facilities, these are all, we're prevented from making these kind of substantial investments in the absence of a regulatory framework. So that's been a huge positive change for the industry as we're now able to start to tackle those. Another critical piece from kind of a social aspect is that with the regulatory framework, we're able to, largely destigmatize cultivators and people in the industry and kind of weave this portion of the community back into the fabric of the community in a way that allows for these kind of collaborative efforts and has a lot of social benefits for everybody across the industry. But I definitely also see that the most egregious ills that are associated with the cannabis industry are directly tied to the lack of a regulatory framework. And at the top of that list, certainly for me, I see it in my neighborhood in Honeydew and around the county, is the environmental destruction. It's, world-class cannabis can and is being grown with very, very little environmental impact. And the advent of this regulatory framework simultaneously works to reduce the kind of environmental violations that we see, but more importantly, it allows a chance for high-functioning cultivators to differentiate themselves, ourselves, our infrastructure, and our methodologies from the bad actors in the industry. Historically, we've been all lumped together, but the cultivation industry is really much more diverse than that. And again, with the regulatory framework, I'm able to come, for example, here to the Ingomar Club and talk about how it could and should be done. And that's a really positive thing. As part of the regulatory work that Humboldt County has done, we conducted a track and trace pilot program, which I was extremely proud to be a part of, run by county staff and our ag commissioner. And there was a few key goals in the track and trace program, which is certainly going to be something mandated by the state. Locally, the track and trace program had two main components. The first, of course, was ensuring that product was not diverted into the black market. So that's a critical piece. But for cultivators, an equally or perhaps more important piece is the fact that it allows us for the first time to actually develop relationships with consumers. And we were able to get appellation guarantees. So with a track and trace sticker, a consumer or patient in San Francisco or Southern California could be guaranteed that the product that said it was from Humboldt County is from Humboldt County. Likewise, there was linkages through QR codes to farm websites, to lab testing results. All of these things are important to cultivators like they would be in any industry because it's the foundation for brand development. And branding is an opportunity that has not been open to the cultivation industry. It's another positive aspect that we're able to start to tackle within the regulatory framework. And I think that that's a huge benefit, not just to cultivators, but to consumers. There are a lot of challenges, as I said earlier, for cultivators, from licensing, inspections, regulatory compliance, packaging, transport, but people may be surprised to hear that the single biggest obstacle for us conducting white market sales and making any meaningful channel development in California is competition from the black market. black market products are in dispensaries across California, and it's undercutting the white market. The black market does not have the kind of production costs associated that we do, from packaging, track and trace, compliance, testing, transportation, all of that. And so it's taken those of us that have gone down this compliance path through something that feels like a journey through the looking glass, where we come out the other side, and instead of being concerned about law enforcement, we're now reaching out to law enforcement to help us by helping to work to eradicate the black market. I'm not sure, having gone through the looking glass, who ends up being Tweedledee or Tweedledum in that metaphor, but it's a positive change. I think, lastly, there's an opportunity in building regulatory framework to incentivize best practices from cultivators and to support the best aspects of the industry and increase the quality of products in the cannabis marketplace that consumers and patients can enjoy across California responsibly, and that's something that we're excited to work towards.
Thank you, that was great. So we want to try and leave you guys or send you home with as much relevant information as possible. And so I thought one of the, we've spent a lot of time banging our heads against the wall and made a lot of mistakes. We did a very quick ordinance and found out that some things work and some things don't. And so we want to send you guys home with as much of our mistakes that you can learn from as possible. So I wanted an interesting question that we could ask the panel is that, if you had one or two things that the county could do over again, what would those be?
First thing I would say that I think our county would have benefited from was an advisory committee early on. Stakeholders from industry, the environmental industry, and it kind of happened that way, but it wasn't an official one, and I think that it would have been better if it had more teeth to it, I guess, substance. And then the second, I'm not sure if this is really something that counties can address, but I think it's something counties should be aware of. And with this emerging industry or emerging regulated industry, also comes emerging consultants and what I like to call carpetbagger consultants. And this has been a big problem in Humboldt County, and I think you all should be aware of that. Again, this industry hasn't worked with a lot of professionals, and so we didn't quite know who to pivot to, and we started seeing and pivoting to consultants who had a fancy logo, a subpar degree, and could talk the talk, but they're not being able to walk the walk. And so while our numbers are roughly, we're looking at needing 1,000 more applications to come in, I do want to say that the how do I say this? It's not quite just the industry not being able to get it together. There's also a big consultant issue not being able to get it together. And I don't know how you would address that as a county, but I think it's something you all should be aware of.
A lot of what we have confronted has been things that are largely, I think, out of the county's control. Who could have envisioned a lawsuit from a group that included both those who were totally against cannabis and those who are small growers who didn't really like legalization? I mean, I don't know how you bring those two groups together, but somehow in Humboldt County we managed to. So we created a lot of situations for ourselves, or a lot of situations were dictated by external forces. So that being said, one of the things I would say is the advisory group that Kara mentioned, I think early on, especially going into the permitting process, would be really, really appropriate. And then I think better messaging of what the process actually entails. The planning process or the permitting process is not like going to dinner and ordering off the menu and getting something back in a half an hour. I mean, depending on your jurisdiction and the process involved, it takes weeks, months, hopefully not years. But need to inculcate in people an awareness of just what is involved in the process, so that they can plan for critical dates, plan to be ready for January 1st or whatever date needs to be targeted.
I think especially in counties where there's an existing cultivation or associated manufacturing industry, it's important to identify leaders in those industries and use them from a county government standpoint as ambassadors to the wider community. Certainly, I'm not alone in this. Tara's been involved in this. There's a lot of other people locally that are leaders in the cannabis industry, and it's been useful, I hope, for county staff to lean on us to get messaging out, because it helps cross that trust divide that a lot of the existing industry has towards anything that looks like a government official. I would also say that it's important to recognize that when you have the advent of a regulatory framework, suddenly, certainly in Humboldt County, the cultivation community gets split and torn. You get a small component of the industry that elects to go forward, that has elected to go forward, and for someone like me, I've waited my whole adult life for this opportunity. I'm not alone in that, but we're pitted against neighbors who are entrenched in either the black market or just too uncertain about what the future looks like to move into a regulated marketplace. And it's important to put together a way that perhaps in conjunction with county staff and law enforcement, there's active support for the people that are electing to spend the extra money and go the extra mile to be in a regulated marketplace, because the competition and the difficulties in us competing with the black market scares a lot of people off from entering the process in the first place. And that's something to think carefully about at the outset.
Thank you. And then maybe just as an add-on question for Director Ford is how does the county interface with the cities, and is there things that can be handled differently with that?
So one of the things we're doing right now as part of our update of the ordinance is that we're going to be sitting down with the cities and talking to them about their concerns within the sphere of influence. We've come to recognize, especially as Supervisor Pennell mentioned with Fortuna, that there is a real concern on the part of the citizenry there in terms of what's happening on their borders. So we are looking at developing an overlay zone that happens within the sphere of influence that would not completely necessarily prohibit, but make it more difficult to get a permit within those areas by making the process more difficult, i.e. a discretionary permit. And it's not an absolute prohibition. There may be areas there that could be permitted, but if you want to go down the process, you really better weigh the cost in terms of, do you have neighbors that might be upset? And so we are engaging in those dialogues right now, and just dialoguing with the cities within the county is really critical. That probably is a lesson that we learned after the fact.
Okay, thanks. And then I'll have one more question, and we'll go for questions for you guys. And that one would be, so is there specific tools for communication that we can use or anybody could use when they're dealing with the cannabis industry? What tools exactly work the best to communicate back and forth?
Scott touched on how we've not been able to use branding to have communication with our consumers. Well, and now we are, and we're super excited. We're also using branding and social media to have communication between ourselves. Instagram, who knew this was going to happen, but Instagram for Humboldt County has been a major tool in the last 2.5 years. We're super excited to be able to talk about what we're doing and show our different techniques and show our branding and just a shout out to the neighbor down the road. On my Instagram account, I maybe have 400 or 500 farms just in Humboldt County alone. And so I've found through my organization that being able to message through social media, specifically Instagram, has been crucial and key.
I'm a little more traditional in that, and I would say that one of the things that we've found really important is to put things in writing and get it out there often. Because what typically happens is if you say something verbally to somebody and it starts to get out there, by the time it gets to the 100th person, it's a different story. So we have a mailing list of 2,300 that when we develop a letter, we send it to the entire mailing list and let everybody know exactly what we want to communicate. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes you hear the uproar. But when you hear the uproar, at least you know that there's some thought going on.
Yeah, I don't think that it has to be an either or. I think in Humboldt County, it's been a variety of communication methods that have helped get the kind of messaging and understanding out there. Much of it in the cultivation community is word of mouth, because traditionally that's how we've interacted with each other. It's rural areas, it's meetings outside the pickup truck window. But there's a connection between the kind of letters that John and his office produce, and then Tara can then post on Instagram and Facebook. So they're not at all mutually exclusive, but outreach to the community, especially when you have an existing cultivation community and you can get people that are in that track. For me, being people in my neighborhood know that I and others who are in the permit track, and they come to us for information. How did that go with Fish and Wildlife? What did they ask you? What happened when the Ag Department came out? And that's been a really positive way to share that message and kind of get across the trust divide there. The other thing to keep in mind, I think, with communication is understanding at the outset that not everyone in the cultivation industry is interested in moving forward. Not everyone in the cultivation industry wants to make this jump. So you can really only set expectations to communicate with the people that you know are wanting to engage, and understand that a certain segment of that industry, of our industry, is not going to engage.
All right, is there any questions from the audience?
The black market, and Scott, you had mentioned the black market, and so I'm looking at comparing Humboldt and Mendo here with this question. So given what Humboldt has done and the path that you're on, what do you think, as being in the community, what do you think the impact, how much of an impact do you think Humboldt County's ordinance and their program will make on the black market? And then I could compare that to Mendocino County.
The presence of the black market is really frustrating. And one of the things that's frustrating is that we can see people in our valley who are blowing up their operations, grading all winter through historic wet weather. And we also see that there's no intervention on their production. That not only kills us at the dispensary level. Right now, dispensaries are able to buy product from whoever comes through the door with product. Once the state regulations get put into place that dictate that dispensaries have to purchase from licensed producers, that levels the playing field, and that day cannot come soon enough for people who are trying to do white market sales. Nobody that's, from a cultivation standpoint, that's going down this path is doing it for short-term financial gain. It's an investment in the future. We care about the property we have. I have a business I'd like to leave to my children who work on the farm. And so keeping that in mind is really important. That's at the dispensary level. As far as a neighborhood as a county, currently enforcement is a complaint-driven process. And because the cultivation community has been sort of insular and xenophobic, there's a lot of resistance to engage with law enforcement and call them and say, what's happening with my neighbor? You know, I'm sticking with my existing footprint, waiting for my permits to get through, and I'm seeing people just go wild in the neighborhood. That creates a lot of tension in the community. And so I think finding a way that people who are electing not to get permitted can be penalized. I think certainly having it be a civil process as opposed to a criminal process makes that, expedites that. There's been discussions about, fines on a per day basis. I mean, I think all the tools are in place to be able to see what's going on. It just requires and perhaps Sheriff Hansel or the planning department can speak more to this, but it's going to require more active intervention from the county and law enforcement, because it also has the effect that people look around and go, well, these people are now growing 5 acres. Nothing is happening to them. Why should we engage in the permit process that's only going to make things less profitable and more complicated?
Yeah, just follow up on what Scott mentioned. We are in this effort constantly evolving, and one of our evolutions is with respect to code enforcement. So while Scott is absolutely correct, our traditional approach to code enforcement has been complaint driven. We are going to become more proactive. And part of that is going to be looking at the most egregious violators that have recently come in and done significant grading, tree removal, and have started a work without permits that are outside the permitting process. And we're largely going to do that through aerial reconnaissance. One of the other things we're looking at, maybe I shouldn't say this here, but I think it's kind of interesting, so I will, is one of the big complaints we get is relative to light pollution. Well, it is publicly available to get nighttime photographs now, and those can be overlaid into our GIS system so we can identify exactly where those properties are. And so we can develop like a 5-fold area where you graded, you remove trees, you have no permit, and you've got greenhouses that are illuminated all night long, and start just sending letters to the property owners that you're now in violation. And as was mentioned by Supervisor Fennell, we've upped our fines to $10,000 a day. So basically you've got 10 days to remediate, to stop, desist, restore, and if you don't, you start incurring fines immediately.
So let me know when I can Instagram about the lights and the GIS.
Yes.
Because that will turn the lights off. Although right now technically the lights are pretty much off, but next year.
We say no to the glow. Right?
Put a tarp on it.
Put a tarp on it. Good afternoon. My name is Malia Cohen. I'm a supervisor from San Francisco County. Thank you for hosting us today. My question, we're talking about working with the cannabis industry, and we're having a high-level policy discussion. I'm wondering what happens to the workers, because they too are part of the industry. In San Francisco, we've got warehouses that are largely being converted into cultivation sites. We've got dispensary applications, more than we know what to do with them. And right now we're looking through the application through a land use process. And cleaning up that process as well. You've got the Department of Public Health that has their hand in the process. We're streamlining it. But one of the things that I've noticed that I haven't heard yet is that you've got UFCW, United Food Workers, that want to represent the workers, maybe the cultivators. Then you've got the Teamsters that want to represent the drivers and the transportation. How does that all come together from your perspective here in Humboldt or in Mendocino or Training, some of the other counties?
I think I'm going to start kind of back into the ordinance process and talk about centralized processing centers. Humboldt County, well, the state hadn't come up with the processing license yet. We've got there now. It was really important to Humboldt County from a public safety issue standpoint, and an environmental standpoint to remove the act of processing or trimming from the hills and bring it to town where it could be regulated, where it we had the proper facilities, and we were reducing the impact of having so many people out in our rural areas. Our roads need a lot of help, and we need septic, and we need to have regulatory compliance, and it's just not accessible for a lot of small farmers and business owners. So Humboldt County has been really good about, or almost really good, getting there really good about permitting centralized processing. So that I think is the starting point for this conversation. As far as unions go and labor, we're just not quite there yet. I think we'll get there when we start seeing those processing centers and over 20 employees. But it's definitely starting to become a conversation from my perspective.
I have a question, a follow-up that you mentioned about the carpetbaggers coming. The carpetbaggers, and so do you not see representative business managers coming to town halls, coming to meetings, trying to organize Is that just not
they're
happening?
definitely. I'm not. Yeah, no, not quite. There's been conversations that they want to come up, but we haven't, as a community, as an industry, formalized until recently with the organization that I and others helped start. Really had a industry leadership that's been hosting a lot of those meetings, and so we've been getting emails about it, but we haven't actually moved forward with anything.
Yeah, that's a great question. This falls into the category of things that I've been waiting for a very long time, which is the ability to increase the quality of my workforce and the environment in which the workforce operates. So traditionally, in the lack of a regulatory framework, we're forced to have trimmers come to the farm to process, which is, I promise you, the single worst aspect of the entire job is hosting, feeding, housing, managing this crew in a rural location. One of the things that's now possible that we started last year and are improving this year is, as Tara mentioned, moving processing into centralized locations. And one of the main upsides for us, all my workers are on workman's comp, for example, something that we're able to do now. But additionally, when you're only hiring people for seasonal work, you're pulling from a much lower functioning pool of people. But when we can move the trimming and the processing into centralized locations, those locations also contain manufacturing, packaging opportunities for employees. So now we see the beginning of being able to have competitive living wage, $20 an hour jobs where people are not just looking at this as a seasonal work, but now they're coming into our industry from other industries because they're working in clean, licensed, ADA compliant facilities. They work 9 to 5:30. When they're not trimming, they're packaging, sorting, doing a host of other jobs. And this is a situation which is a win-win for cultivators and employees that's only possible with the regulatory framework. So that's been a positive change that we're really excited about.
Wouldn't that increase your operating expense? You have a higher, more talented, more skilled workforce, meaning you're paying them more. As a farmer and business owner, you're prepared for that?
That's partially true, but it's a little more nuanced than that because when I have a crew that lives at my farm, I have to feed them 3 meals a day. I have to house them. I have to have someone who shops for and prepares the food. Sometimes these bills run into the $70,000, $80,000 a year just to feed a crew that processes for 6 months. When I get people into a facility, I'm adding some costs that I'm excited to add, like workman's comp, but I'm also shedding an enormous amount of the costs and the hassle, the quality of life that goes along, or the lack of quality of life that goes along with that. And so the other thing is that in the past, trimming and processing has been on a per pound or a per unit basis, and it's been high because it's difficult to find those people. But when I can move these jobs into town and they become 9 to 5, 9 to 5:30, 40-hour-a-week jobs, now I can pull from a much bigger population pool and people who are much higher functioning. And instead of being on a piecemeal sort of per unit basis, the equation is shifted to an hourly basis. So now I'm just paying hourly, whether they're trimming, whether they're packaging, processing. And so it's been a net positive financially for us to make this shift. And again, it means that we can, if I have to find employees who don't have a job or a relationship or anything else that ties them from going out to working in the hills for months, that's a very small group of people, and it's not always the highest functioning workers. When I can bring these jobs into town, I can lower my costs, increase the quality of the situation for the workers, and draw from a much wider pool of employees.
Thank you.
I was somewhat astounded yesterday when we drove into the growing facility of the lack of security. I know if you came to Humboldt County and looked at our situations, we have grows all over, we know that, but they're very protected by heavily armed people. But the situations we've had is people coming in, and we've had multiple murders of people trying to steal marijuana. We've had home invasions that have occurred. I can't imagine Humboldt is immune to that. but can you speak to the security aspects, and are you worried about it? You see that progressing into the future as you become more open and involved with the county and law enforcement?
Yeah, from industry perspective, yes, all of those horrific situations from the past have happened. They've happened to me personally. I've lost everything and had nowhere to turn. There's no insurance. You don't call the sheriff. You just bear that burden. And so from my perspective, this regulation is giving us the opportunity to pivot, to call the sheriff, to engage with insurance and be able to recoup some of the losses should it happen. Now, the violent crime issue, I don't know how to answer that. I know our farms are not going to arm up from my perspective. We're trying to remove the gun issue from this, and yeah, you're right. It's something that we're going to be continually dealing with as long as this goes on. But we have tools now, whereas in the past we didn't.
I think of security, and the way I talk to my team is just don't be low-lying fruit. And I think that this falls also under the umbrella of the negative aspects of the industry being really a vestige of the lack of a regulatory framework. Okay, so at my farm, we have cameras, Cat5 cable, encrypted DVRs recording at the gate, at the greenhouse processing, all entry. Same with the processing facilities in town. We also have alarm systems connected to law enforcement. So I personally see an increase feeling of safety, not a decrease. We have seen a lot of violent crime here in Humboldt County, but when I read carefully the articles about this is all black market stuff. This is not people who are trying to sell through the white market dispensary channels. These are people who are slinging pounds and involved in other kind of drugs that cannabis just gets lumped into. That is black market stuff, and to whatever extent that the regulatory framework can help beat back the black market, I see those kind of criminal aspects going along with it.
Yeah, I also think the farm we went to, there was nothing really there to steal at that point, right? So they probably don't need a whole lot at that point. And then the manufacturing place that we went to, they had pamphlets on the counter there. It was Omni Security, and it's like ex-military and sheriff and even CIA people. It was they're heavily armed. That I know that company contracts with. And they have a whole, it's not in your face, but it's a background security that they have that's pretty high tech.
I'm going to sort of tag on to, hey, good morning, tag on to what Malia was mentioning. I'd like to get everyone's thoughts on this as well. Just a little bit of facts. Over the past 20 years, African Americans, particularly those living within certain open beats, have been dramatically and consistently overrepresented in cannabis-related arrests, reaching as high as 90% of all cannabis-related arrests in Oakland, California. That being said, leveling the playing field has become very important to Alameda County. And tying on to what Malia said regarding unions, everyone knows come January 1st, all of these people in the business will become agricultural employers. That being said, union is right there around the corner, right? So that, when I think about diversity in this industry, take a look in the room right now. How are we dealing with that issue as well, right? How are we dealing with diversity? How are we outreaching LGBT, those who have been unrepresented? We're doing what we can in Alameda County because those of you who don't know, you saw what happened in the city of Oakland with Councilmember Desley Brooks. This is a serious issue when we think about whom are being left behind out of this industry, right? So particularly I'd like to hear all of your thoughts on that as employers thinking about unionization, because they're going to be a part of this business as well, like any other supply down chain business, but also those who are being underrepresented, and who have been basically incarcerated while we were all rolling out these wonderful legalization laws. Those are sitting there in Santa Rita, San Quentin, places of that nature are wondering what the what, right? Thoughts on that, please.
In part, it has to do with the makeup of the counties in which business is going on. I know for Humboldt Legends, when we began to tackle branding, the first thing we did was to go to San Francisco and find a woman who worked in the industry who could begin to put together branding that speaks to women, because that's something that's been really missing in the cannabis industry. Everything that counts for branding thus far has been very narrowly construed and hasn't had that an aspect that reaches out especially to women. The first sales VP that I hired was an African American gentleman, specifically in an effort to engage with a more diverse community. And we've since been able to expand our hirings to include wherever we can minorities and women. It's something that we're extremely committed to. I absolutely see the issue that you're talking about. And I suppose on a certain level, I followed a little bit just through the newspaper about what's happening in Oakland. It's going to be kind of a community by community basis, but I think it needs to be absolutely an important component of how we tackle the business. And I think it should be seen as an opportunity, right? Because we're able to look at things with the benefit of hindsight in other industries, it gives us the opportunity to build this industry by being proactive as opposed to reactive to some of the problems in the past.
From a government standpoint, I'm not sure, especially from a land use standpoint, I'm not sure how I would answer that. I mean, obviously, as we work and hire staff and look at staff, we pay particular attention to making sure that our actions are non-discriminatory. But in terms of land use, that's not really something we approach upon. The ordinance does talk about the importance of treating ag workers as ag workers and regulating them as appropriate to that. But obviously that's regulated at a lot of different levels too.
From an advocacy standpoint in Humboldt, we haven't really addressed this issue. I'll be really honest with you, and I would love to spend some time and talk about it and see what we can do.
I guess from being on the Board of Supervisors, we've sat in hundreds of hours of meetings and countless meetings, and I can tell you, I don't think that has ever come up in Humboldt. So it may just be a different place up here. We're extremely rural, and the issues are different everywhere you go. Do you guys remember that ever coming up anywhere? No. Yeah. So I really haven't thought about that at all.
You're right, it is county by county. But D&I, diversity and inclusion, means different things. For instance, we have, believe it or not, in Alameda County, we have ag as well, right? So in East County, Supervisor Haggerty's county, Livermore, Sonoma, right? Diversity and inclusion means different things to them versus what it means in Oakland, California, where Supervisor Miley is the supervisor. In our rural counties, what they care about when it comes to diversity and inclusion is, are you making sure that women can participate in this business? Are you making sure that the big farmers don't take everything and you making a way for the little farmers? So my point is, it's not always about race when we talk about diversity and inclusion in this business. And people seem to think that we want to jump to race. It's not. It's about what is intrinsic to leveling the playing field. And I'm up in the rural counties. In Calaveras County, I hear it a lot as well. Don't let R.J. Reynolds come in here and take our farms for us. That's diversity and inclusion. That's the county's role in our county, to level the playing field, to try to ensure that it's fair and inclusive for everyone. I just want to clarify that.
Okay, yeah, that is definitely something that's been on our radar from the beginning, and that was actually when the industry first came to us about the role that we would play in this and how this ordinance would be done. It was always the small farmer and R.J. Reynolds and and all that. And I can also say that I've been out to some of the farms that are permitted recently, and like one of them is up by Willow Creek, which is next to the Hubbard Reservation, and there was, I think, out of 20-something workers, there's probably half of them were Native Americans. And I know that the cannabis groups have a woman, what's the name of it? Women Cultivating Community. So we've, it's been, it's been on the forefront, and so I don't think any of that's been left out for sure. And thank you for clarifying your question.
I'd like to add something. There's another opportunity to address the diversity employee concerns that you bring up, which is really critical. At Humboldt Legends, this is the reason why we incorporated as a benefit corporation, because it sort of codifies a wider set of values in the corporate structure beyond just fiduciary responsibility to shareholders for profit, and it expands that emphasis to include the people that work in the organization, the products, the environment. Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's are other big examples of companies that have done this. The benefit corporation model is something new to California, but part of the reason why we went down that path is to demonstrate that not only does this help tackle diversity, but it also is a really positive marketing tool for companies. And so it's again, a way in which, with the benefit of hindsight, we can help build the structures of this industry moving forward to incorporate these problems so that we can address them ahead of time, as opposed to trying to fix the ills that we all sort of live with from the past.
I also work on technology policy, and the same issues are running rampant in technology as well as it is here. Literally the same speeches that I stand up and say are the same things when it comes to technology. So when we have these emerging businesses that are going to be, rolling out, it's good to make sure that we have D&I at the table, not an afterthought, like, okay, we'll get to that later. It's important for all reasons that all of you are mentioning to have those two running the same. I say the same thing to our technology partners.
I absolutely agree, and I think it's a benefit not just for the people working in the organization, but everybody involved, all the stakeholders all the way through. I appreciate it.
I can definitely speak to being a woman in the cannabis industry and being an advocate for the cannabis industry and as a woman. And first, being in the industry and in Humboldt County, women run the show here. We have for a long time. And quite honestly, we're some of the best farmers there are because there's a lot of ideas of why. But nonetheless, we've always been an intricate part of this industry and we will continue to do so. On the advocacy side, we also have been some of the loudest voices, definitely, and the most persistent, and really haven't run against the current on that, and haven't found the more misogynistic aspects that could be part of that aren't really here. Women are very much included in the conversation and running it a lot of the times.
I just want to offer a couple comments from a city's perspective. And John Minster, I'm the new city manager of the city of Fortuna. I was a councilman with the city of Arcata for many years and served on the league board, so I was on the policy side for many years too. So I just want to echo some of the points, I think, from especially the counties that are just starting to undertake their programs, that it's really important that the pace of this is staggering. Everyone wants their permit by tomorrow, and so the capacity of your county and your cities is really critical. I would think about caps or phasing some of your approach as you move forward. The unintended consequence issue John's touched on. So spheres of influence is where a lot of your conflict is going to occur. That's kind of where we're sorting through things here locally. One size is not going to fit all. So some of your cities are going to have very different issues. So I would think about that as you move forward with your programs and be adaptive. And then some of the things that Tara and Scott are touching on in terms of best management practices, those are go across the board. So I think it's not too soon to start talking to your cities. So you don't have one scale and one program at the city level and one at the county. So I think trying to get uniformity across the board is really critical.
Big thanks to the panel.